And welcome back, everyone, to Pokemon Team Creation Series. What is Thor, Odin's son's Pokemon team? Thor actually proved to be a bit tricky. Now, I say that all the time, but it's because every character is unique. And so sometimes easy as hell to figure out teams for them. Other times, not so easy. And Thor proved to be a little challenging. First and foremost, you have to deal with Mjolnir. That's actually, he's like based up, the god of thunder, Mjolnir. That's easy. It's once you get into what crux of character he does have that you start to run into a couple minor issues. Like, okay, yeah, he's noble, he's a hero, but he's also, you could throw anything in there. Odin's son, but how do you deal with Norse mythology apart from a couple legendaries that represent that? And even then, they don't represent an aspect of Thor, so it proved a little tricky, but let's get into it. First and foremost, we needed the Mjolnir, and luckily, thanks to Scarlet and Violet, we got Tinkaton. We got a Mjolnir Pokemon. And we got a Pokemon that literally wields a giant hammer. Now, granted, it's not a one-to-one, as Thor's hammer is actually very small and compact, although some versions of Mjolnir are much larger than others. I think the ultimate version of Mjolnir is far larger than the standard counterpart. In fact, it looks more like Stormbreaker from the MCU than it does an actual version of Mjolnir. But generally speaking, Mjolnir is pretty compact, but you have a hammer on Pokemon that wields a giant hammer. It wields a hammer. You have to put it on Thor's team. But there's also him being the god of thunder. Now, that one I could have gone a litany of electric types with, but Thor's one of those characters where having a lot of legendaries on his team could make a lot of sense, as he is the god of thunder, a legend in his own right. So Tornadus, the electric, what do I call it? Electric master. The electric Pokemon within the Jin weather trio makes sense. He is essentially a living thundercloud. He has a humanoid form, at least in part. So the god of thunder makes a lot of sense for a thunder-based Pokemon. I could have gone his, Therian form, but no, this one makes more sense. After that, it started to get a bit trickier. So, one of the things that has happened in Thor's run in the comics, and even in the MCU, is that he did become the king of Asgard. And he's been the king of Asgard for a good while in many of the comics. It has not been a permanent fix sometimes. Odin has come back in one capacity or another. But generally speaking, he has become the king of Asgard on multiple occasions. And so, we needed a Pokemon that is a king. Luckily, we have Calyrex here, who is the High King Pokemon. Now, I stuck with regular form Calyrex. The reason for that is, even though Thor has definitely gotten comfortable in the role of king in some of the comics, a lot of times it's not a position he necessarily wants. It's a position that's either forced upon him or he does it out because he's the only one who can, and something worse could happen if someone else doesn't take the throne. So I like the idea of doing this weaker version of Calyrex for the version of to represent his kinghood, if you will, because it would represent a version of Thor that isn't completely comfortable. Isn't at full capacity as king, whereas Calyrex and Glacier, Calyrex and Spectre as one, is a Mon who is, I think, a fully realized king, Thor. So I went with the weaker version, just because I think it works a little bit better. Now, let's go to the last Mon I put on the team real quick. One of the things that I used to round up team is the fact that as a warrior, he's kind of a brawler. Like Thor knows how to fight. He knows how to box. He knows how to fight. He does know how to fight, but he's a warrior, but he's more of a brawler. So I knew I needed a fighting type on the team, but I didn't want one that had like a lot of finesse to it. I needed one that was more just muscle and power and maybe throw around something like, say, Conkeldurr, which throws around these giant stone pillars that I can't recall. Are these things actually attached to Conkeldurr's hand, or do they just carry these things around with him? I cannot remember that. Conkeldurr is another one of those examples of, hey, we had a fighting type line that had a trait evolution at the end in Kanto. Let's basically redo that again here, because they're essentially kind of redoing Kanto in a way. That was pretty much what we had there. Now, we didn't have that, say, with the Gengar line. Hell, we didn't even have that with the Victory Bell line. In fact, we didn't even have that with the Alakazam line. But we did have it with the Geodude line with Gigalith. Two Pokemon that I've actually always wanted to use on a team in a playthrough is Gigalith and Conkeldurr, and I can't get those things naturally because they trade. You can't even find them in the goddamn wild in Scarlet and Violet. You gotta find them in Terra raids, and that pisses me off. Because, let's be honest, most of us don't play with friends a lot of the time, unless, you happen to have a friend who has the game and you're in regular contact with them. I digress. I've always hated trade evolution. It is my least favorite form of evolution, bar none, hands down. Because it means you can, if you don't have friends who play the game, you can never complete the Pokedex. It is such a bullshit trade mechanic. I get what it was intended to do was, trade with your friends and all that, and, be closer with your friends. But it's like, what if you're someone who just plays by yourself? That's whatever. Encouraging the introverts to interact socially. Shame on you, Game Freak. But no, Conkeldurr made sense to me just because it is just more of a big brawling muscle, physical powerhouse. And to be fair, because it is wielding two stone pillars, Mjolnir in the comics is technically made from metal. It's made from Uru, but it's metal that looks actually more like stone a lot of the time. Though it is in fact metal. So I kind of like that. I do wish if we ever got, because there's implications we're going to the Netherlands, and apparently that's one of the big theories that we're going to the Netherlands for Gen 10, which that area could lean itself towards some Viking lore. Definitely could. Galar had a little bit of that with Berserker. A regional Honedge who is a hammer, the whole Mjolnir thing. Look, if you want to find regional variants, type variants on Honedge, you can find Mjolnir. You can find like the Maui fishhook, which I believe is what is the actual Maori, not Maui, but Maori, like a fishhook version of it, which is I believe a water ghost type. I think you can do a grass ghost type, one of the two. I'm sure there's a couple other ones that aren't. So I think there's a spear version out there somewhere. So you can do quite a few variants on Honedge. I'm amazed they didn't create a hammer one to make Mjolnir. That's kind of a given. The problem is Game Freak doesn't openly just straight use the fan designs. What they'll do is kind of rob fan designs a little bit, because they've shown a couple times that Game Freak has clearly stolen inspiration from fan ideas and just put their own take on it, and said, "Oh no, we thought this up, yeah, us," because they don't want to pay people for those designs. That's guaranteed the reason they don't do it, is they don't want to pay people for those designs. That being said, you could literally pay someone $50 and say, "Hey, it was created by this person," and people would be happy. Do you understand what the fan community is like a lot of times, where it's just like, my design gets to be in a game? They would take whatever little money they'd ask. It was like, give me $20 and a Big Mac and a soda, and I'm good to go. I would take a Wendy's burger over a Big Mac any day. I don't like McDonald's. I've gone on a tangent. Conkeldurr. He's the warrior. He's got stones that can kind of represent Mjolnir a little bit. Moving on. So another thing about Thor is that because to wield Mjolnir, you have to have a lot of things. You have to have a pure heart, at least in the sense that there's not really any evil in there. You have to be a warrior. You have to be virtuous. All that. I like the idea of Gallade on the team. Gallade is kind of the virtuous prince kind of character. He definitely is the save the damsel from distress. His mega form gives him a cape. He becomes a superhero. I like Gallade on the team for this. I think it works pretty well, actually. In fact, I argued with myself about giving him the mega, and if I were to really think on it longer, I probably would lean towards the mega. I just didn't have an image available to use. But yeah, you had the cape on, and he would work pretty well with Thor, I imagine. But that leads us to the last mon on the team. Now, this one I thought of, and I'm like, all right. Thor he's the Prince of Asgard. He is Thor Odin's son. He became the King of Asgard. But one of the big things he has been is that he is a protector of Earth. He's a protector of Midgard. And therefore, he's not necessarily trying to keep the balance of Midgard, but he's there to protect it. The world he's there to protect. So I thought the idea of Zygarde was interesting, because Zygarde is the Pokemon of ecological balance. He's there to protect the world when it goes out of balance, and he will come in hard and hot when he has to. Now that said, I put 50% here, but I imagine any version of Zygarde can work in this, except for like, a non-existent cell, or not existent cell, a non-fighting cell version of Zygarde. I imagine any version that is an actual Pokemon of Zygarde can work due to the idea that Thor has gone through many trials and tribulations throughout his time as a hero of Earth, as an Avenger, as an Asgardian. So you can easily use a different version of Zygarde to represent where he's kind of at in his journey. A 10% where he's just starting out, 50% maybe is when he shows up on Earth and becomes an Avenger, 100% when he's full-on realized his destiny to protect Asgard and Earth. So I like, because of the whole idea that it's a Pokemon of ecological balance, of protecting the planet, I like this idea that it's representing his, duty that Earth is under his protection. So with that gives us Thor's team. Now, as always, how balanced is this team? And luckily, I actually decided to write this down for a change. I started writing it down, and I stopped writing it down. And when I broke it down, it comes out like this. This team has 5 weaknesses, and 3 of them are pretty bad. Or sorry, 2 of them are pretty bad, and 2 of them are just kind of, First and foremost, oh, by the way, Thor, I forgot to mention, this video is brought to you by X-2, who gave me the suggestion. I apologize. I normally do that in the very beginning, but anyway. So, right out the gate, 2 of these mon have a problem with ice. That's Thundurus and Zygarde. Zygarde's got a ×4 weakness to ice. 2 of these mon have a problem with fire. That'd be Calyrex and Tickaton. They're steel and grass types. They just are going to get hurt very easily and very quickly by fire types. Their secondary types, sadly, don't resist fire at all. Actually, that is not entirely true. I believe Fairy, let me double check that real quick. I think Fairy is it fire that resists Fairy, or is it Fairy that resists fire? One of them resists the other. Hold on 1 second here, because I honestly forgot that part. All right, hold on. Fire is... Okay, it's fire that resists Fairy. Fairy does not resist fire. All right, we're good. Sadly, Tickaton is still going to take a ×2 damage from fire. And then 2 of these guys, both the psychic types on the team, are going to get hurt by ghosts. They have a ×2 weakness to ghosts with no extra resistances. In fact, Gallade actually has another problem with ghost types, in that its fighting type can't do a damn thing to ghost types. So those are your 3 just standard weaknesses that can't be dealt with really at all. But then you have a ×3 weakness to Fairy on the team. Now, that would obviously come to Conkeldurr, it will come to Zygarde, and it comes to Gallade, because Psychic doesn't resist Fairy at all. At least I'm pretty sure Psychic didn't resist Fairy. Let me double check that real quick. Yeah, Psychic doesn't resist Fairy at all. So you now have half your team weak, at least ×2 weak to Flying. That's a problem. Sorry, to Fairy. That's a problem. But it's not as bad as the 4 times weakness this team has. 4 of these mon are in trouble with flying. And that is Calyrex, that is Zygarde, that is Gallade, and that is Conkeldurr. All of their secondary typings do not resist flying. Dragon doesn't even resist flying. It resists the original 4 types plus electric. But it does not resist flying. It's completely neutral to flying. So, unfortunately, yeah, its ground type is at a disadvantage. Then you have Calyrex's grass type, which is at a severe disadvantage. Fighting type on both Conkeldurr and Gallade, neither of them have a resistance. So, when it comes to the weaknesses of this team, all teams are going to have a weakness of some kind, in theory. I only focused on the weaknesses that overlap, though. So, the fact that half the team has an issue with separate types is not an issue. With Ghost, Fire, and Ice, respectively. 2 out of 2, so forth and so on. Now, I mean, to be fair, do those ×2 weaknesses overlap at all? Yes, the Ghost overlaps twice over with 2 different, but that's regardless. The Ghost doesn't overlap with any of the other Mons at all, as far as I can tell. Actually, no. The Ghost overlaps with Fire and Ice. So actually, Calyrex is a bit of a hindrance on this team, because it is weak to 4 out of the 5 problem typings on this team. Fairy overlaps, only overlaps with a flying weakness and ice weakness. So with Zygarde, so that's a problem. But yeah, flying and fairy are your 2 big threats on this team overall. If you were to somehow get like a flying fairy type or a flying ice type, or God forbid a fairy ice type, this team would be in a world of hurt, honestly. There would be very little this team could do. The flying type, assuming it wasn't Landorus or Gligar or Glisar, could be handled by Thundurus. But other than that, yeah, you're going to be dealing with some problems on this team. A fairy ice type, for example, would be extremely problematic for this team. Now, granted, the ice type could be a little bit of a threat due to the steel typing of Tinkaton, as Tinkaton would be the only one that would be kind of resistant to it and have like straight out attacks that would be damaging, like steel-based attacks. But Alolan Ninetales could especially because Alolan Ninetales is not very slow. How fast is a Ninetales anyway? Because the stat-wise, as far as I know, the stat distribution on Alolan Ninetales is, I think, the same as regular Ninetales, if I'm not mistaken. Okay, so yeah, Alolan Ninetales has surprisingly, its best stats are its speed and special defense. Its special attack being its third highest stat is only 81. But again, it's still got a 109 speed, and nothing on this team, save for, who else was it? Save for, I want to say maybe Thundurus could keep up with that. Let me just check that real quick before we end this out. How fast is Thundurus for its base stat total anyway? Thundurus is, okay, it's 111. It is 111. So it is mildly faster than Ninetales. But that being said, it still has a weakness to ice. Like, Ninetales still has that big type advantage, and if it hits it with a strong enough ice type move, freezes it or anything, Thundurus goes down, and it's the only one that's got the speed to keep up. So, yeah, Ninetales is going to actually cleave through the majority of this team until Tinkaton comes out. And even then, that's not a guarantee, as Ninetales can learn other attacks. Even Alolan Ninetales can learn other attacks that could, in theory, hurt it. So, yeah, anyway, I digress. So, what do you think of this team? Do you like this team? Would you do something different? Let me know in the comments below. But thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Like, comment, share, subscribe. And I'll see you guys next time. Later.